First thing I'm going to check are my center clearance lights, all three of them, to make sure they're proper color, amber in the front, make sure they're properly mounted and attached to the bus. Then I'll check the amber warning lights on both sides, making sure they're properly mounted and attached, they're not damaged or broken. Then I'll check the passenger stop lights to make sure they're proper color red, they're not damaged or broken. Check my windshield wipers to make sure they're properly mounted, they're not damaged, bitten, or broken. They are holding tension against the windshield and the rubber blade is not frayed, cracked, or worn. Then I'll check the traffic mirrors on both sides to make sure they're properly attached to the bus. They're not damaged or broken, especially the glass is not cracked. I'll check the passenger crossover mirrors to make sure they're properly attached. They're not damaged, bent, or broken. The glass is not cracked. I'll check the turn signals to make sure they're proper color, amber. They're not damaged or cracked and properly mounted. I'll check the headlights to make sure they're not damaged, broken, or cracked. They're properly mounted to the bus and they're clear in color. I'll check the child protection arm to make sure it's properly mounted. It's not damaged, bent, or broken. Then I would look underneath for any puddles such as coolant or antifreeze that would indicate a leak to the bus. I would also check to make sure the bus is not leaning to one side. That could indicate a flat tire or a broken suspension component. The next thing I would do is move to the engine compartment of the bus. I would open the hood. The first thing I would check on this side of the bus is my water pump. My water pump is right here. It's not damaged, bent, or broken. It's properly mounted. There are no leaks. Next thing I want to check is my alternator. I'll make sure that the alternator is bolted on securely. It's not damaged, bent, or broken. The electric wires are not frayed or cut. I would check my serpentine belt to make sure when I push on it, it has no more than 3/4 inches of play. It's not frayed or cut. Then I would check my coolant to make sure that my coolant is properly filled, and never open a reservoir of coolant. It could be hot and could leak over onto you. While I'm here, I would check all my hoses on the bus to make sure they're not damaged, frayed, or cut, they're not leaking, and they're properly attached. Then I would go to the other side of my engine compartment. I'll check the power steering reservoir to make sure it's full. If it's below the cool mark, I would have it filled. Make sure it's mounted properly and securely and it's not leaking. I would check my air compressor to make sure it's mounted properly and secure. It's not damaged or broken. It is not leaking and it is gear driven. I would check my oil. I would pull the dipstick out, wipe it off, reinsert it, and pull it out again to make sure the oil is filled to the proper level. Also looking at the oil to make sure it's not white in color. That could indicate water is inside the oil. The next thing I would check on this side, I would check all my hoses to make sure they're not frayed or cut. They're properly attached, they're not bulged, none are leaking. Then I would check my steering system. I would check the steering linkage at the top to make sure it's bolted tight and secured. It's not damaged, bent, or broken. I would check the steering gearbox to make sure it's bolted on tight and secured. It's not damaged, it's not broken or leaking. I would check the hoses to my power steering box to make sure they're connected tight and secured. They're not loose or leaking, they're not bulged. I would check the lower steering linkage or pitman arm and drag link to make sure it's properly mounted, not damaged. Checking the castle nuts to make sure they're on tight and secure and the cotter pins are in place. Then I will check my suspension. I will check the leaf spring to make sure it's not shifted, it's not cracked or broken. I would check the spring mounts at the front and the rear to make sure they're bolted on tight and secure, they're not damaged or broken. I would check the U-bolts in the center of the spring to make sure they're bolted on tight and secure, they're not damaged, and the bolts are loose or tight. I would check the shock absorber to make sure it's not damaged, bent, or broken. It's not leaking any fluid. I'll make sure that it's bolted securely to the vehicle. Then I will check my air brakes. I'll check the air hose to make sure it's properly connected at both ends. It's not frayed or cut. It's not leaking any air. I'll check the air chamber to make sure it's properly mounted. It's not damaged, bent, or broken. It's not leaking any air. I'll check the slack adjuster and the push rod to make sure they're at about a 90-degree angle to each other. All the pins are in place. If the brakes were released, I could not pull this brake out more than 1 inch. I will check the brake drum to make sure there's no illegal weld repairs. It's not damaged, bent, or broken. There's no oil or grease. I'll check the brake pads to make sure they're not worn excessively thin. They're not cracked or damaged. That's the brakes. I will check the tread depth on my front tires, making sure that all major grooves had a minimum of 4/32 tread depth. There's no wires or cords showing on the tread, and it's worn evenly. I would check the sidewalls of the tires to make sure there's no abrasion, bulges, or cuts on the tires that could potentially cause a blowout. I would check my rim to make sure it's not damaged, bent, or broken. There's no illegal weld repairs. I will check all of the lug nuts to make sure that they're not loose. Shiny silver threads could indicate one is loose, or rust trails dripping down where water's got trapped behind it. I would also check the holes to make sure they're not oblong, which would indicate that they were loose. I would check the hub oil seal to make sure that it is bolted on tight and secured. It's not damaged, bent, or broken, and it's not leaking. And I'll check the air pressure with an air pressure gauge to make sure it's properly inflated. Next thing I'll check is the side of my bus. I'll start with the top. I'll check the 3 clearance lights on the top, making sure they're properly mounted, they're not damaged, bent, or broken. They're proper color to the front of the bus. They're amber in color. On the rear, they are red. Then I will check my stop sign to make sure that the lights are not damaged or broken. They're properly mounted and they are red. Make sure that the sign says stop, and check everything on the other side for the same thing. Then I'll check to make sure that the cable is not frayed or worn, and the air diaphragm is not damaged, it's not broken or leaking any air. And I'll check all my wiring to make sure it's not frayed or worn or cut. Then I will check my turn signal and my reflectors to make sure they're properly mounted, they're not damaged, bent, or broken. They're amber to the front and red to the rear. Next thing I'll check is the frame, exhaust, and drive shaft. My frame is right here. I'm checking for any illegal holes that could be drilled in it. It's not damaged, bent, or broken. It's properly mounted. I'll check the drive shaft from front to rear to make sure it's properly mounted, not damaged, bent, or broken. There's nothing wrapped around it. I'll check the safety straps in front and back to make sure they're properly mounted and attached. They're not damaged, bent, or broken. I'll check the exhaust, which is the silver pipe, from front to rear to make sure it's properly attached to the bus. It's not damaged, bent, or broken. I'll make sure that there's no holes which could let carbon monoxide leak out. One way to find that would be soot trails that would be black around it. I will check my suspension parts, check the spring mount, those leaf springs. First checking my spring mount to make sure it's properly mounted, it's not damaged, bent, or broken, all the bolts are secured. I will check the leaf spring to make sure it has not shifted, it's not damaged or broken, it's properly attached. Then I will check the U-bolts in the center of the axle that hold it to the axle to make sure they're not damaged, bent, or broken, they're not loose. I would check the shock absorber to make sure it's attached at both ends, the bolts are tight, the shock absorber is not damaged or leaking. Then I would move to the airbag in the back of the bus to make sure that the airbag mounts are properly secure on top and bottom, they're not damaged, bent, or broken. Looking at the airbag to make sure it's properly inflated, it's not damaged or cut, and it's not leaking any air. Then I will check the brakes on this axle. I will check the air hose to make sure it's properly attached. not cut or frayed or leaking, I would check the air chamber to make sure it's properly mounted, not damaged, it's not leaking any air. I would check the slack adjuster and push rod to make sure they're at about a 90-degree angle. They're not damaged, bent, or broken. All the pins are in place. With the brakes released, it should not pull more than past 1 inch. Then I'll check the brake drums to make sure there's no illegal weld repairs, they're not damaged or broken. There's no oil or grease on it. I would check the brake pads to make sure they're not worn excessively thin, they're not cracked or broken, there's no oil or grease on it. Then I would move to the rear tires on my bus. The first thing I would check will be my tread depth. There should be no less than 30 seconds of tread depth in all major grooves. It's worn evenly. There's no frays or no wires or bands showing. The sidewalls, there's no abrasion, bulges, or cuts. The tire is properly inflated. I would check it with an air pressure gauge on the rear tire. I would check the rim to make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken, no illegal weld repairs. I would check all of the lug nuts to make sure they're properly mounted, not damaged. The one way I could find if they were loose, if I saw shiny silver threads or a rust trail leaking down from it, and make sure that the holes are not oblong. I would check the oil seal on the axle to make sure it's bolted on tight and secure, it's not leaking. The spacing on the tires on this bus, we have bud spacing. I'll make sure that there's no foreign objects wedged in between the tires. Then I would check the splash guard or mud flap to make sure it's properly attached, it's not damaged, bent, or broken. Then I would go to the rear of my bus. I would check the strobe light on top of my bus to make sure it's not damaged, bent, or broken. It's proper color, clear. Then I'll check the 3 clearance lights in the center of the bus to make sure they're properly mounted, not damaged, bent, or broken. They're proper color, red on the rear. Then I'll check my passenger warning lights to make sure they're properly mounted, not damaged or broken. They're amber in color. Then I'll check my passenger stop lights to make sure they're properly mounted, not damaged or broken. They're proper color red. Then I would move down to my turn signal to make sure it's properly mounted, not damaged, broken. It's proper color amber. I'll check my stop light to make sure it's mounted properly and securely. It's not damaged or broken. It is red. I'll check my reverse lights to make sure it's properly mounted, not damaged or broken, and it's clear in color. Then I'll check my license plate light to make sure it's properly mounted, not damaged or broken, and it is clear in color. I'll check my tail lights, make sure it's properly mounted, not damaged or broken, it's red. And I'll check the reflectors on the bus to make sure they're properly mounted and they're not damaged or broken, and they're red. Next thing I'll do is check my emergency exit from the outside. I'll open the door to make sure that the door is securely on the hinges. My hinges are not damaged, cracked, or broken. I'll check the weather seal around the door to make sure it will not let carbon monoxide back into the bus. And I'll close the door, make sure it closes properly. On this side of the bus, I would check unique items. I would check to make sure that I have a fuel cap. It is on tight and secure. And also look under the bus at my fuel tank to make sure that my fuel tank is mounted securely, it's not damaged, and the fuel tank is not leaking. Next thing I'll check is my entryway. I'll check my door to make sure that it's mounted to the hinges securely, it's not damaged or broken. I would check all my stairs, the stair treads, to make sure they're not damaged or broken, they're properly mounted. There are no tripping hazards on my stairs. I would check my handrails to make sure they're securely mounted, they're not damaged, bent, or broken. I would check the entryway light to make sure it's properly mounted, not damaged, bent, or broken, and it is clear in color. Then I'll go inside my bus. Next thing I will check will be the safety equipment. Making sure that I have a fire extinguisher properly mounted and it's in the green, properly charged. Make sure I have a body fluid cleanup kit, a first aid kit, and 3 reflective triangles. Then I'm going to check all of the passenger seating areas, making sure that the seats are securely mounted to the floor and none of the frames are bent or broken.
Are we ready?
Next thing I'll check is the rear emergency exit to make sure that it does open from the inside and the alarm works. And I'll go to the front of the bus. As I'm going to the front, I'm going to be checking the emergency exits. Hit the rear emergency or the roof emergency exit to make sure it opens and the alarm works. Then I'll check my side emergency exits to make sure they open properly and that the alarm works on those. Check this one. I'll continue checking the seats. This is a good time to look for any vandalism and graffiti on the seats. Next thing I'll do is check my driver's seat to make sure it's properly secured, it's not damaged, bent, or broken. I'll check the seat belt to make sure it's not frayed or cut. And I'll have a seat and make sure that the seat belt securely fastens. And I'll check to make sure everything's adjusted for me. I'll make sure my seat's adjusted where I can reach my pedals comfortably. I'll make sure that all of my mirrors are properly adjusted for me. And then I will do a lab test. I'll turn the bus to run. I'll press on the brake pedal and then I'll release my parking brake after the initial air loss. I will start timing. I will hold the brake pedal for 60 seconds. During the 60 seconds, I'm making sure that I'm not losing more than 3 psi of air pressure, and I'm also listening for air leaks. After the 1 minute, the bus did not lose any pressure. It maintained, and then I will fan the brakes down to get the alarm to sound. I'll pump the brakes, and about 60 psi the alarm will sound. Then I'll continue to fan the brakes down by pumping them, and around 30 to 45 psi the parking brake will pop out. That is a lab check. To do is proper safe start. Turn the key to run. Make sure that the ABS lights turn on and they go off. Then you apply your foot to the brake. Make sure the vehicle's in neutral and the parking brake is applied. Then you can safely start your vehicle. I'll make sure that I do have oil pressure. It did not stay on 0. I'll make sure that the water is not overheating. And make sure I have enough fuel for the trip. And I'll make sure that my air pressure is building. I'll also check to make sure that the battery's properly charging between 12 and 14 volts. Next thing I'll do is check my heaters. My rear heater does work. And I'll also check the defroster. So this is defrost. Turn the fan on. And the defrost is working. Then I will check my turn signals indicators. The right turn signal indicator does work. The left turn signal indicator works. The hazard light indicators work. The high beam indicator light works. Then I can check my windshield wipers to make sure they work on low, on high, and also make that I have washer fluid to clean the windshield. I'll once again check my windshield to make sure it's not damaged, cracked, or broken. There's no illegal stickers or anything that's obscuring the driver's view. Check my horn. I'll check my amber warning lights on the inside to make sure they're working. The indicator light is on. Then I will check the stop lights to make sure they work. My indicator is on. I can see my stop sign out the mirror. I can see my red lights in the front, and I can see my walking control arm is extended and the door is open. Next thing I'll do is a parking brake check. I'll push on the brake, make sure that the parking brake is applied. I will shift to drive and try to move forward with a light press of the accelerator. The bus did not move, so we know the parking brake is working. The next thing I'll do is a service brake check. I'll leave the bus in drive and release the parking brakes by pushing it in. Then I will slowly roll forward about 10 feet and I will apply the brakes to make sure that the bus does stop normally. The bus did stop normally. It did not grab or pull to one side or the other, and there were no unusual noises. Now if you'll assist me with the check of lights by outside, first thing you need to check are the clearance lights on top, the low beam lights and the marker lights, the high beams, the left turn signal, right turn signal, the hazard lights, the amber warning lights, the stop lights, the stop sign, the walking control arm, and the door. Now if you'll help me check the rear. Check the clearance lights on the top and the tail lights. Left turn signal. Right turn signal. Brake lights. Reverse. Amber warning lights. Stop lights and stop sign and door. The strobe light on top. And my hazard lights. All buses are equipped with the same components. However, the different manufacturers put the items in different locations. Like on this bus, for example, you have the alternator with the wires, your water pumps back here with the hoses, your oil, dipstick, and your coolant are all on the passenger side of the bus. Then if we walk around to the other side of the bus, the bus you saw previously had a gear-driven air compressor on it. This bus, this is the air compressor, and it is belt-driven. You would check it for the same things, make sure it's properly mounted, not damaged or broken. There are no leaks, of course, with all your hoses and everything. The buses are all similar, they have the same components, but they are located in different locations, so you just have to get familiar with the bus you're checking. If you're driving a substitute route or a different bus for that day, go ahead and look for the parts. You can find them. They are all located on the bus.